means something different to the second usage in the same verse. They do this with absolutely no basis from a linguistic or contextual point of view. It's only because they now know retrospectively, thanks to scientific understanding, that Dhul Qarnayn couldn't have possibly found the sun setting in a muddy spring of water, that they try this weak argument. If we look at the context of the verses before and after this one, the Quran speaks about Dhul Qarnayn being given power. The hadiths say he controlled the whole world. Some Muslims argue he was this particular historical figure or that one, but for the sake of argument, I will be looking only at what the Quran says about this Dhul Qarnayn character. So let's start at 1883, where it reaffirms what I said in the first video on this chapter, that this story was forced upon Muhammad to prove his prophethood. He was asked about Dhul Qarnayn as a test to see whether he knew the story or not. This is evident by how this verse begins. They will ask thee of Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I shall recite unto you a remembrance of him. Lo, we made him strong in the land and gave him unto everything a road. And he followed a road, till when he reached the setting place of the sun, he found it setting in a muddy spring, and found a people thereabout. We said, O Dhul Qarnayn, either punish or show them kindness. Okay, so looking at the context, Dhul Qarnayn follows a road until he reaches the setting place of the sun. If he would eventually just see the sun setting over the horizon, what was the purpose behind him taking a road journey? Couldn't he have just stood there and waited for sunset if he was only going to see it set over the horizon anyway? Next we see, after taking a road, he physically reaches the setting place of the sun. Now the Arabic word used here for reaching is balagha, and apologetics will say here that this is reaching the time when the sun sets, not the location of the sun setting. While in essence the word can be used for both reaching a place or a time, as I will demonstrate shortly, when looking at the context, it's clear the meaning behind balagha in this instance means to reach a place. Let's move on. He said, As for him who doeth wrong, we shall punish him, and then he will be brought back unto his Lord, who will punish him with awful punishment. But as for him who believeth and doeth right, good will be his reward, and we shall speak unto him a mild command. This appears to me to be a typical gap filler. He doesn't have much information on what is happening with these people, so we hear the same old line of, if they are good, I'll leave them alone. If they're not good, I'll punish them. Trying to indicate that Dhul Qarnayn was a just follower of Allah. But it's rather poor storytelling. Let's keep reading. Then he followed a road, till when he reached the rising place of the sun, he found it rising on a people for whom we had appointed no shelter therefrom. So here Dhul Qarnayn takes another road, walks all the way to the eastern part of earth to arrive at it rising on a people who had no protection from it. Looking at the tafsirs of Tabari and Ibn Kathir here, we see them saying these people were black. Or, more accurately, the word used to describe them is Negroes, as zinj in Arabic. Now in fairness, I don't know whether this was considered a racist term back then, but the fact that they were black because they had little protection from the sun suggested that they believed black people were burnt by the sun because they had no protection from this rising sun. Let's keep going a little further. So it was, and we knew all concerning him. Then he followed a road, till when he came between the two mountains, he found upon their hither side a folk that scarce could understand a saying. Now, this last verse is the nail in the coffin for Islamic apologists. This is because we can understand the context of the story. When Muslims claim that the word balagha means to reach a particular time instead of a particular place, it makes absolutely no sense when you continue reading and get to this verse. In this last verse, balagha is also used to describe Dhul Qarnayn reaching these two mountains. Reaching the time of these two mountains would make no sense whatsoever. Reaching the place where the mountains are makes sense. The context shows balagha in this story is used when Dhul Qarnayn is reaching places, not times. Therefore, he definitely reached the place where the sun set. We also see the word wajada, to find, used here when he arrives at the two mountains. I don't see Islamic apologists trying to tell me that this use of wajada actually means he only thought he saw the mountains in front of him, that they appeared that way due to his mistaken perspective. Moving on to the second point. The verse speaks about the sun setting in a spring of blackened, muddy water. It uses the Arabic word ayn, which means spring. Apologists claim Dhul Qarnayn would have seen it setting from his perspective over the horizon, similar to how you would see sunset out at sea, like in this picture. Now, the Arabic words for bodies of water are as follows. Muhit means ocean, Bahar means sea, Buhayra means lake, river means nahar, Ayn means spring. Now, oceans and lakes aren't actually mentioned in the Quran, and I think that may be due to the fact that at the time of its revelation, any large body of water was referred to as sea. The Quran clearly uses the word spring as the location for where the sun physically sets. Now, is there a spring anywhere in the world which is large enough that it would appear to stretch all the way to the horizon? The biggest spring on the face of this earth is somewhat misleadingly called Frying Pan Lake, or Waimangu Cauldron. It's roughly halfway between Wellington and Auckland. Now, New Zealand isn't even considered somewhere out in the west, nor was it inhabited by humans at the time of Muhammad, and this spring only appeared after a volcanic eruption 130 years ago. But for the sake of argument, we'll ignore these points and I will grant you this spring because it is the biggest one in the world. The widest diameter of this spring is only 200 meters. This is what it looks like. If you think that this picture is taken from a deceptive angle, then watch this video. You can clearly see that there is no way on Earth any spring can appear to a standing person as if it stretched all the way to the horizon. And therefore you cannot be fooled into thinking that the sun actually set into a spring. Now moving to the third point, there's another major flaw in the argument of apologists who claim it was only from the Qur'an's perspective. It's a hadith from Muhammad confirming where the sun sets every evening. Here it is, narrated from Abu Dhar. I was sitting behind the Messenger of Allah who was riding a donkey while the sun was setting. He asked, "Do you know where this sets?" I replied, "Allah and His Apostle know best." He said, "It sets in a spring of warm water." Now we can see it's ridiculous to keep insisting the Quran didn't mean it actually set in a muddy spring. We have a hadith direct from Muhammad where he tells us that the sun sets in a muddy spring. Now a Muslim might say not all hadiths are true, and they would be correct. So let's quickly recap what the main classification of hadith authenticity is. The very best hadith you can get is Sahih, which is considered by mainstream Muslims as 100% fully authentic. Next we have Sahih Hasan, which is basically accurate. Next we have Hasan, which means good. Next we have Da'if, which means a hadith is weak. Finally we have Mawdu', which means fabricated. This hadith by Muhammad about the sun setting in a muddy spring is classified, yes, you guessed it, Sahih. So the top classification. There are other hadiths regarding what happens to the sun, including one which tells us that after setting each night the sun goes beneath the throne of God to worship him, and every night it would ask for permission to rise again from the east. Something that's scientifically impossible, given the fact that the sun is always in the sky at some stage on a spherical earth and would only disappear on a flat earth. The other hadith is considered equally authentic as this one, so they don't really contradict one another, but both are clearly referring to a flat earth. Now, on to the fourth point, and in my opinion the most fascinating. We will now take a look at how the Quran was interpreted by the earliest Islamic scholars. One of the most senior Islamic scholars in the past, if not the most senior, is a scholar known as Tabari. His full name was Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, and he wrote two very important pieces of work. An extremely comprehensive account of the history of the universe told through Islamic narrations, as well as a very thorough commentary of the Quran. Both works have undeniably formed the basis for the vast majority of Islamic history and Quranic interpretation. If we look first at his book explaining the history of the world, we find that Tabari, who is said to have died in the 10th century, said the following based on the information in the Quran and the Hadiths. He is explaining what happens to the sun in our sky and is quoting Abdullah ibn Abbas, Muhammad's cousin, and is considered by both Sunnis and Shias as one of the most knowledgeable and respected Muslims.